Welcome to Pastor with Dave Stone. I'm Dave Stone. We are thrilled that you have joined us. If you haven't checked out some of the preview episodes, make certain you check those out. Got Ted Cunningham on there, conversation with him. We got Kyle Eidelman talking about comparisons within ministry. I also do a preview of all the things that you can expect within this podcast. But today, you're going to get to hear from a friend of mine who has had a huge impact on my life for a number of years from a distance because of a book that he wrote, but more recently, just from getting to spend time with Brady Boyd. If you don't know Brady, Brady is married to Pam. They've been married for 35 years. They have 2 adult children, Abram and Callie. He served in ministries in Texas. We're going to be talking a little bit later about all the varied things that he has been involved in. It's going to blow your mind of what a wide background that he has. He moved from Texas and came to Colorado Springs. He has been here for nearly 18 years, leading New Life Church. It's had some crazy stories within it, and we'll be talking about those today. I assure you that they will be stories that will give you encouragement and hope if your church has gone through a difficult time. Let's join in on the conversation with Brady Boyd. Brady, thank you so much for being a part of this.
Thank you. And I mean this sincerely, that you're one of the best pastors I've ever met. And I'll tell you this really quick story. The first time you and I ever talked, you called me to talk about an event that we were doing together. And you asked me like 10 or 12 really good questions, and you were very interested in the answers. And I got off the phone and I turned to my wife and I said, Pam, I just had a phone call with Dave Stone. That may be one of the best pastoral phone calls I've ever had. It was so encouraging. You just radiate pastoral. So there's nobody on the planet that should be hosting this podcast, and you, pastor to pastor, it was made for you. So I'm honored to be with you.
Well, you are a kind man, and you are going over the top with those comments. Now I'm racking my brain trying to think, okay, what were the questions that I asked? I need to keep asking those questions.
No, it was really good.
I called my wife first day that you and I met in person, and I said, hey, this guy is a kindred spirit. And I know that every one of you who are listening today, you're going to feel the exact same way, because Brady is one of the most approachable pastors that you would ever meet. And
thank you.
I want to start with a strange question. You've got a varied resume, and so first of all, were you a storm chaser for a while?
Yeah, I did.
I should have confirmed this with you first.
I did. Yeah, I actually was a certified tornado spotter for KWKH Radio in Shreveport, Louisiana, and we had some wild nights. I mean, in the spring of the year, that's right in Tornado Alley. And we would get these wild tornado outbreaks there, and they would send me out in a pickup truck with a walkie-talkie, basically, and I would go live on the air telling people what I was seeing. And I had been married less than a year. So
How old were you?
I was 22 years old. I didn't have.
I'm sure they were paying you handsomely.
Yeah, about $1,400 a month.
Yeah, to risk your life.
But wild times. I was telling someone the other day that I got too close to one of those storms one time, and tree limbs were hitting the side of my vehicle live on the air, and I'm trying to report, so I had to pull into a ditch because I got too close to the tornado. And my wife is listening to that, and I sounded like a fourth grade schoolgirl. My voice was real high, and so I get back to the radio station.
She's scared to death for you.
I'm terrified. Yes, I'm terrified. Tree limbs are hitting me, and they all made fun of me for about a year back at the radio station. I couldn't live that down.
I bet there's some weird stories of things flying through the air. And
yeah, my first cousin is a sheriff's deputy in DeSoto Parish, Louisiana. In one of those storms, he's driving this is in the middle of the night. Think about that. Pitch black, middle of the night. He's in his patrol car, and a full-grown pig, comes flying through the air and goes through his front windshield. a pig because I guess the tornado had picked up a
Wow.
pig somewhere off a farm and dropped it right in the front windshield of his patrol car.
Wow, that's a
We got all kinds of fun
swine
stories.
flu.
Yeah.
Yeah, might be a stretch a little bit there. Now, you also were a sports broadcaster.
I did that. I coached basketball. I did play-by-play for professional basketball, pro baseball teams.
Love it. Love it.
And just really, I tell young people all the time, when you're in your 20s, say yes to everything. I mean, explore. I mean, in my 20s, I went wild. Anytime someone would ask me to do something, preach at a truck stop, I preached at the downtown at the rescue mission. If I got asked to do something in my 20s, the answer was yes. And I have all these adventurous stories, but it also unlocked an adventurous heart in your 20s that I think a lot of 20-somethings, that's the decade, I think, where your sense of adventure gets unlocked. And I just went for it and did so many fun things in my 20s. Obviously, I can't go at that pace anymore, but man, my wife and I had so much fun in our first 10 years of marriage. We really did. We enjoyed that time.
Well, as you're talking, I'm thinking back, and I know everybody who's listening is thinking back to some of those adventurous seasons, and there's nothing wrong with those times. And you're right, there are different seasons in ebb and flow. That's a nice segue into one of the main topics that we want to talk about, because ministry, for every church leader who is listening, there are all sorts of tugs and pulls and tension of balancing things within life. And I had a season in my life where I said yes to everything, and I still struggle with that.
Yep.
It's not a job that's 9 to 5, where you put the shingles on the roof, and at the end of the day, at 9 o'clock, the wife is not saying to the husband, what's wrong, honey? I don't think I got that one shingle correct. I can't stop thinking about it. But in ministry, that's what we're thinking about, as all of the marriages in crisis, the leadership issue with an elder or deacon or a staff member. Talk us through the situation. Let's take ourselves back. You've been married to Pam for 5 years.
Yep.
You come home, and her bags are packed.
Yeah, she told me, I'll never forget what she said. She said, Brady, I feel like a single mom, a single lady. You're never here. And when you are here, you're exhausted. So if I'm going to be a single person, I'm going to go live with my parents because they have time for me. And I said to her, and my wife is not dramatic. She's not, she's very peace-loving. She's a sweet person, has always been very kind, but I had pushed her past her limits, and it was my fault. And I said to Pam, Pam, if you will not do that tonight, I'll resign tomorrow from my ministry job. She said, I don't believe you. I said, by this time tomorrow, I will resign. And sure enough, the next morning I walked in to this very demanding ministry job that I had. And I said, I choose Pam over this, and I choose my marriage over ministry right now. And they were upset. They had to hire 3 people to replace me. And that's when I realized that I had let some unholy ambitions really drive ministry. And we're all prone to this, right? I mean, we all think that we're doing something great for the kingdom and we're going 100 miles an hour. But I tell people ministry should feel like breathing. Breathing in and breathing out. And a lot of times in ministry, we're breathing out, breathing out, breathing out, breathing out, but we're never taking in the oxygen that restores our lungs and our bodies. And we look up one day and we're exhausted and we're tired because we've gotten out of the healthy rhythms of breathing in and breathing out.
Well, that's a beautiful picture for us to think of. And that phrase of you saying, I choose Pam, I choose Pam.
Yep.
It resonates with every one of us because I can think of so many times when my family has gotten the leftovers and my church and ministry has gotten the better parts of me, and my time and of my significance. You talk a little bit about how it is that we can become wiser with our scheduling and the quality of what we give our best to. Would you
Yep.
expound on that a little bit?
Yeah.
You'll say it better than I ever could.
Well, I told my kids there will be seasons where Dad has to give his primary focus to the church. That's true. Easter weekend, Christmas Eve. There are some times when Dad's going to be really focused at church, but that will be the exception and not the rule. The rule is that you're going to get my best, and that when Dad's home, I'll be present with you, and there'll be gas left in my tank when I come home, because I only get one chance to raise my children. And for every parent that's now an empty nester, looking back, you see how the days were long, but the years are short, and that's a true saying. And my kids are now 26 and 24, and it went by in a blink. I mean, and honestly, let me say this to the young pastors that are listening. Those first 10 years with your children are the most critical.
Yeah.
If you get the first 10 years right with your kids, the next 10 years are a joy. If you don't get those first 10 years right, the next 10 years can be really difficult. Now, that's a generalization, and that's not true in every case. But what I'm saying is, I made my kids a priority those first 10 years because they were, and the reason that's important is because they're listening. I am God to them those first 10 years, right?
Right.
They admire me, they respect me, but around 11 or 12, 13 years old, kids start listening to other people's voices. When the first 10 years, I am the primary voice in their life, but then they start listening to others. And so I just realized that. I had some really good older people in my life when I was a young man. Jack Hayford was one of them.
Oh, wow.
Jack Hayford said, Brady, he said, churches, well, you need to sacrifice for the sake of your kids. Don't feel guilty at all about saying no. And so he gave me this little thing to do. He said, Brady, on your calendar, on your physical calendar, now this is back before computers, okay? He said, on your physical calendar, write down, go home and be with Pam and the kids, so that when you get invited to do something on your day off or in the evenings when you should be home, you can say with honest integrity, hey, I would love that, but I already have something on my calendar.
You can say it and mean it. That's awesome. Genius.
Yeah, Jack Hayford told me that. So I thought that was really good advice.
While you're saying this, I'm thinking of different staff members and, disclosing here, I struggle with workaholism. It's been a constant battle for me, and the busyness and moving toward productivity, doing more than being, and that's been a constant ongoing struggle for me. But I'm thinking of different staff folks who, this gal who, boy, she would put in 60 hours, and we only wanted 40 hours from her,
right?
And she couldn't turn it off, and I'm thinking of a guy who was talented beyond anything a person could imagine, and yet he couldn't turn the faucet off.
Yep.
The first time I spent a day with you, you said a phrase that you didn't realize it, but it hit me squarely in the face. And here was the line. You said, if you're always saying it's just a busy season, then it's not a busy season, it's a habit.
It's a habit. It's a lifestyle. Well, I appreciate you saying that. And first of all, we need people who work hard. Okay, so this podcast is not for people who are not already working hard. So I'm assuming that I'm talking to people who wake up every day with a single-minded focus, with a strong work habit, a work ethic.
Put their best foot forward for the Lord.
Yeah, that you're sleeping well at night, you're eating good because you want to have good energy for your day. So I was with, not the name drop, but I've had a couple of meetings with Eugene Peterson. He's a legendary. I just love Eugene Peterson.
He wrote the Bible, didn't he?
He rewrote the Bible.
Sorry, all right, that's right. He rewrote. Sorry,
translated it. But he said something to me. I was at his house in Kalispell, Montana, on Flathead Lake one time. We're sitting on his back porch, just a 2 days that I'll never forget in my life. And he said, Brady, he said, there's a lot of people in the church that have an extra gear. Now I'm thinking about this girl who you're describing that works 60 hours a week. He said, there's a lot of people in the kingdom that have an extra gear. They have extra energy. He said, in my 30s, I realized that I was one of those people that I had a lot of leftover energy. And he said, but I realized I couldn't use it all at the church because it would exhaust people and it would wear people out. If I used all of my energy in the church, He said, so I started running marathons. So I would work hard, and then I would go home and train for marathons. He said, because I just needed another place to burn off some of that energy, because I realized if I pushed the people as hard as what I have, that they would fall by the wayside, and I didn't want that. He said, I want people to go at a pace that they can tolerate, a pace that would be productive for them. He said, so I had to find other places to burn off that energy. I've told so many, Enneagram 3 pastors, those high achieving kind of pastors, those, the workout warriors, those guys. Yeah. I'm not one of those guys, but I was just on the phone with one the other day, and I told him that story, and he's a dear friend. But man, does he work hard. He gets up at 4 o'clock in the morning to work out, and he'll be up at the church till 7 or 8 at night. I said, look, you're in your 40s right now, and I know you think you're doing something. I said, but you're wearing your staff out. You're exhausting them because they're not wired that way. So we just had a really good friendship conversation about what can you do outside of church to burn off some of that energy and still be productive. I'm not talking about wasting your time, but find something else to do that doesn't require everyone else to run with you. And that to me was great advice from Eugene Peterson. I've never forgotten that.
That's great insight, and you had a good paraphrase of what he said. I like that.
Paraphrasing.
So talk to me about small church leaders versus large church, because I know you've been around both, and you have a heart for church leaders, different roles in any size church. Do you see the temptation for busyness more one direction or another, or is it universal?
I think it's universal. I think I used to pastor a small church in West Texas, in Hereford, Texas, a church of about 150 people. Mm-hmm. And I've also led large churches. I lead a large church today. I tell people all the time that pastors of smaller churches are under greater pressure than I am. I have, when you have a team and when you have a staff, you can kind of create some artificial firewalls around you, and you also have help. I mean, I can't do every funeral at New Life Church but I have a team of people that we can do every funeral. So you have team, you tend to have a greater pool of volunteers that will help you. But in a small church, sometimes you're it. I remember in my young 30s, pastoring that little church in the farming community, that I was much busier then than I am now. The pressures, the demands. I remember one day when it hit me, that morning, a guy named Hap Haggard, that was his name, a sweet old man. I was by his bedside that morning. He breathed his last breath. I prayed for his family and started planning for his funeral. That was like at 10 o'clock one morning. And that was in a hospital. He died in the hospital room. Like 5 doors down in that same hospital, a couple that had been struggling for years to get married was about to give birth to their first child. So I went from holding the hand of a dear old saint, helping him find his eternal rest, to walking 5 doors down, sitting with a couple whose face was lit up with joy. Wow. They were so happy. They had just given birth to a child. And then that's when I realized as a young pastor, it's like, this is the marvel of pastoral work. It's what most people don't understand about the pastoral vocation, is the range of emotions that you go through on a daily basis. You go to any corporate Fortune 100 CEO and ask him, when was the last time you sat next to one of your employees who was dying, and later that day sat next to one of your employees who was giving birth? It never happens. That happens 5 or 6 times a week for me. Yeah. Easily. This past Sunday, I had a guy walk up to me. He just found out that he's getting a large inheritance, and he was so happy. He was so joyful. He wants to give money to a bunch of ministries that we support. Full of joy. I literally turn around. The next person waiting for me is almost homeless. She has no groceries. She has no fuel. She has a 5-year-old son, and they're hungry. That was Sunday. That was last week. And that happens almost every single day. So when I say to pastors, look, what we do doesn't make sense. It's what we do. It's not impossible, but it's very difficult. And we have to recognize that. The things that are pulling on your emotions, the highs and the lows, and everything in between that happen on a daily basis, that's why Sabbath, solitude, rest is a priority. Listen, rest is preparation for the work you're going to do. But if you don't prepare yourself with rest, then your body keep score. There's a great book out there about your body keeping score. And you'll look up one day and you're going to be flat of your back with something wrong in your body because you did not understand that rest is preparation for the work that you're assigned to do. And I can't emphasize that enough. I'll say this, I know this is going to be, I think 2 full days off back to back for a pastor are pretty important right now. And that's why I try to take Friday and Saturday off, because one day is for running errands, mowing the yard, getting the oil changed, picking up the dry cleaning. But that second day is Sabbath. And Sabbath is not a day off. Sabbath is my time with the Lord. And most pastors don't understand the difference between a day off and Sabbath.
Yeah,
and there is a difference.
Would you unpack that a little bit? Because, I'm a guy who, again, I feel like I'm confessing to a counselor here. But I struggled with taking a day off. And at the heart of that struggle was pride.
Yep.
And so I prided myself on saying, I haven't taken a day off in 26 days.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that terrible? I mean, I look back, this is my early years, and I had an accountability partner that busted my chops on it. And then his question started becoming, did you take a day off this week? So unpack this concept, the Sabbath concept, but you're taking it a step deeper of differentiating how important that rest is.
Yeah.
So,
well, first of all, it doesn't happen every week. So I'm describing an ideal to you, a goal. So it doesn't always happen. A lot of times on Friday, for example, this Friday, I just found out that there's an important meeting with a person that I've been trying to get a meeting with for a while, and the only time he can meet is Friday 2 p.m. So I'm going to violate my own rule because of the importance of this meeting. I have to go to this meeting because it's that important. So again, I'm not speaking legalistically here. I'm speaking about goals that you should strive for.
Okay.
So a day off, again, most pastors, I just encourage pastors, start with having a day off and learn how to have a Sabbath later. But unplug for at least a day. Go out with your wife. Take her to a movie. Go for a long walk. Work out. Get some sunshine on your face. Get your hands in the soil if you can. Do something with some animals. There's there are things that restore your soul that are just really cheap and natural and easy that don't cost anything. Going out for a walk is free. Sitting in the sunshine is free. Taking your wife out to the park for a picnic is pretty inexpensive. So that's a day off. What the goal, though, is to have a regular Sabbath. Now, Sabbath is not some kind of religious ritual. It's an invitation to come near to the Lord. Remember, Sabbath is a gift from God to us. We were made for the Sabbath. The Sabbath was made for us. We weren't made for the Sabbath. The Sabbath was a gift to us. And all the Sabbath is an invitation to sit at the feet of the Lord. Now, you can do that on a walk. You can do that out, riding around. It doesn't have to be sitting in a corner quietly. But I try to have a day every week where I am fixated, focused on the Lord. And I'm doing it with my children, so it's not in violation of my family time. We're having fun, we're joking, we're laughing, but our focus that day is let's receive something from the Lord today. Now, again, it's not 12, 14 hours of monastic chanting. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about just getting up. Here's the way I told my kids. Today is a bedhead day. That's what I taught my kids that Sabbath is a bedhead day. Okay, it's in the book there, the whole chapter on bedhead days. They said, Dad, what are you talking about? I said, well, we're going to get up today, and we have nothing on our calendar. Now, I want you to think about the last time some of y'all woke up with nothing to do. What a gift, right? Have you ever heard of FOMO, the fear of missing out? We have a phrase at our house, JOMO, the joy of missing out.
Oh, Brady.
The joy of missing out, the joy of having nothing. Now,
That's great.
That required Pam and I to not overschedule our kids with sports and activities and clubs. But you know what, my kid, at 4 and 5 and 6 years old, my kids, if you ask them, what day of the week is your favorite? They said bedhead day is our favorite because there was no, the house was, there was no stress. There was no activity. There was nothing forced. If we wanted to go to a movie, we went to a movie. If we wanted to go to the park, but we didn't schedule anything. We let the day come to us. Just let the day play out. One day a week.
I'm thinking of my wife. We just celebrated a significant birthday for her. Starts with a 6. I'll just leave it at that because I know she'll be listening to this. But I said, what do you want to do? She said, no party. You cannot have a party. So we had a fake text trail with all the kids that were dropping hints on there of, what time does the boat leave, and what, all sorts of different things. And she said, I want to go to San Antonio. So I said, okay, what do you want to do? She said, I don't know. I just want to go to San Antonio. And all I heard her say for 5 days was, we don't have to be anywhere. You don't have to be anywhere. You're not speaking anywhere.
Oh.
I have you all to myself. And we saw 2 movies. We see maybe 2 movies in 6 months. We saw 2 movies in 3 days.
Yeah,
we went and saw Gone with the Wind because we had never seen Gone with the Wind in our lives. It was like 3.5, 4 hours long.
Yep.
I don't know that it was that great of a movie, but we can say we checked that box, and we just hung out together. And what you seem to be saying is, sorry, I get emotional even thinking about that, but I think I've seen Sabbath as a prohibition, and you see Sabbath as a time of peace.
It's an invitation.
Yeah.
And that's, now think about how good your soul would be. Yeah, again, I may miss it one week. It may not happen every week because life happens, and the demands of travel and family and ministry. But what if you tried to get 2 or 3 or 4 of those in a month? Just my kids, even today, they're 26 and 24. I'm so proud of them because I say, what do you got planned today? And they go, nothing. And they don't feel guilty about telling me that. And I don't make them feel,
oh, that's good.
I don't shame them for not having anything. I actually go, that is a good day, isn't it? Now, again, I want to balance this because I know I'm here. I can hear the feedback even now. But what about kids that don't know how to work hard? Well, you gotta balance that with teaching your kids to show up on time, teaching kids what it means to work hard.
Yeah, put in a day's work. Yeah.
What does it feel like? Like I tell my kids, in order to earn the Sabbath, to get the joy of the Sabbath, 4 or 5 nights out of the week, you need to hit your pillow really tired because you worked hard that day. So that when you get to your day of Sabbath, it is truly a gift to you. And I think that's the balance I've tried to teach my kids. Show up on time, do more than expected of you, have a great attitude, ask good questions, bring solutions, don't just be a complainer. That's how I've taught them to work. And then when you get to the Sabbath, refuel. Let that Sabbath be a season of replenishing you, restoring you, and you're celebrating a week of good work. Now that's good pride.
That's a good phrase right there.
Right.
Celebrating
a week of good work.
Good work
by enjoying a day off.
You impacted me back. I think it was 2014, maybe, when you wrote this book.
Yeah.
Addicted to Busy.
Yep.
And I had a break from my church for several weeks, and this is what the doctor ordered. And I had never met you. I had never heard your name. And I read this, and I felt like it was written for me. And so I just want to say to our listeners, Addicted to Busy, I know it's still out there because I know it's still doing well, isn't it?
Yeah, you get it on Amazon, bookstores, anywhere books are sold.
11 years.
11 years.
11 years, Addicted to Busy. And may this become the next Love Languages book that stays on for decades because...
It's sold dozens. I've sold dozens of them.
Wow.
We had dozens of books.
Oh, that's great. Well, it helped this one. So I appreciate the fact that that you took the time to write it. I'm going to change gears a little bit, and I want to talk a little bit. I didn't share this in the introduction of just when you came to New Life.
Yeah.
It was a tumultuous time, and the reason I share this is not to go back to that, but there are a lot of people who are listening who are working at a church or involved in a church where there has been some type of a moral scandal, or there's been
Yep.
some breach of integrity, or a pastor or a fellow staff member left, and it really marked the church
Yep.
and shook the church up in a bad way. And that was the case when you came to New Life. You were coming into a situation of a very prominent church, high profile, and the scandal was well played out in the news everywhere. And you stepped into that. What was that like, coming into a setting that was different than one that you had ever stepped into?
Yeah.
And what advice would you give for the church leader who now finds themselves in that setting due to some mistakes that have been made by others?
Yeah. Well, I wish I could say I was courageous. I think I was just innocent, maybe a little naive. But when you're 40 years old, I was still in that frame of mind that I was just willing to go anywhere God told me to go and do whatever He asked me to do. And I hope I'm still there now. I'm 58 now, and I don't want to ever lose that sense of obedience and just saying yes to the Lord and trusting Him. But I didn't know what I was saying yes to. I mean, I was coming into a scandal 100 days after I was here. So I was following up a founding senior pastor. He had a very public moral failing. 100 days later, when I came here, I had a shooting. So someone came on my campus and killed 2 teenage girls in my parking lot and wounded others. So in a span of 13 months, our church had a scandal that was on the front page of every newspaper, and 13 months later, a shooting and violence that was on the front page of every newspaper.
Yeah.
So I honestly thought maybe the Lord was calling me to New Life to be a hospice pastor, to give a once great church an honorable death, a funeral. Because I didn't really see a way forward out of that. But to our surprise, the Lord resurrected us.
Yeah, you
And
did.
it was a resurrection. It was a miraculous resurrection church story. Now, I'm talking to leaders today, and the one piece of advice that I would give leaders who find themselves in those kinds of situations, and they may not be as dire as the one I just described, but still, you're feeling it today. As you're listening to this podcast, you're feeling the weight of a church that's having to rebound. And all I can tell you is that you cannot lead a church until they trust you. Trust is the currency of leadership. There is no other currency rather than trust. And there's only one way to get trust. And I tell pastors this all over the world, that trust is earned by doing the right thing for the right reason for a very long time. But once you have their trust, you can lead them. They will follow you. But trust is earned in drops, and it's lost in bucketfuls, right? You can lose trust with one bad decision in 2 hours. You can lose 20 years of trust. So once you have their trust, treat it with absolute that is the most valuable thing you have as a leader, is their trust. And I say this to my church all the time. I say, listen, I want to tell you, thank you for trusting me. I can't tell you how much that means to me. The fact that you would place your trust in a flawed human being that is being saved by grace like the rest of you. But I do know you trust me, and I want to tell you I appreciate it. I hold that in high value. So then when I ask them to give to a special offering, or to volunteer for the children's ministry, or to get involved in our city somehow, they'll move. They'll respond to if I make a valid request that's sensible, that requires faith, of course, but if it makes sense to them, that they are not doubting my motives because I've earned their trust. So as a pastor, you can't go any faster than the trust that people give you. So your church will move at the rate that they trust you. So right now, I've been the pastor here for 17 and a half years, high trust. So they'll move pretty quickly if I ask them to, and they'll go and they'll do big things with me if I ask them to, if that's what the Lord's asking us to do. But when you're there and you've just gone through trauma, I cannot express this stronger than I'm expressing it. You can't. You have to let them be healed before they're going to move. You can't ask wounded people to move fast. Think about it, even in a practical battle scene. Soldiers that are wounded get taken to the back. They get taken to triage. It's soldiers that have not been wounded that get pushed to the front lines, right? So in church is no different. So if your church is wounded, spend some time letting them get healed, pastor them. So one of the things people told me is when I came to New Life is said, Brady, they need a pastor right now. They don't need a prophet. They don't need an apostle. They need a pastor, a shepherd. And so really for the first 5 years at New Life, I just kind of tucked away all my dreams and visions and all that. And I just loved my people and loved them and talked about healing, talked about those things, the heart issues. And then I looked up one day and, we're kind of stretching, we're kind of feeling good, and we're healed. But it took about 5 years. And don't rush that. One of the things that I did well, and I didn't do everything well, but one of the things I'm grateful for is that we didn't get in a hurry. Yeah. And now we can get in a hurry if we want to, because we're healthy.
And you've earned the credibility. You put those chips in one at a time, and now you can call those chips in. As you're speaking, I'm thinking about a church that I worked with, some that had gone through a really difficult time, and I would like to be known as a preacher. I would like to.
You are a good preacher.
I would like to take pride in. He's a preacher. And when I left there, the comments that people made to me after being there for a year and a half, the comments to me, well, it was not about my preaching. None of them talked about my preaching. I still don't think they ever got my sense of humor. I really don't think they did. But they always talked about being a pastor when they needed a pastor.
Yeah.
And it's exactly what you said. I love your analogy of the wounded. You don't put the wounded up front. They've got to heal up. It's a beautiful picture for us.
Yeah.
You alluded to the fact of the city. I heard you say one time, I want to make sure I get this right, don't pastor a city that you are not called to.
Yeah.
Would you share a little bit about that?
Well, for all the young men and women listening that are wanting to go plant churches or go to another church or take an assignment, I think all of us need a holy moment with the Lord where we have a sense of calling to the place. And for me, it happened during the interview process. In fact, not probably a half a mile from where we're sitting right now at a Holiday Inn. Not a Holiday Inn, but a Hilton Inn. I had gone through the interview process. I woke up real early on a Friday morning. We were flying back to Dallas-Fort Worth that day. And the Lord said, I want you to read the book of Nehemiah. So I opened up the Old Testament, and I'm familiar with the book of Nehemiah, but I read the whole thing, the entire book. Took me an hour or so to just kind of read through it. And I closed the Bible, and the Lord said, I'm calling you to be a Nehemiah to this church. Come and repair some broken walls that are here. And I want you to say yes to a kingdom assignment. It's not going to be easy, but I want you to say yes when they ask you. Now, I can't tell you, there has been 50 times that I had legitimate reasons to quit. I was just like, this is too hard. These people are not following me, whatever. All the stuff that pastors think about on their worst day. And I had good reasons to I just want to do something else that's easier. I want to go sell used cars or something because that would be easier than what I'm doing here. And the Lord would take me back to that moment. He said, Brady, I told you that Nehemiah was called to a city. It was a mess, a wreck. The walls were torn down. In fact, he sobbed. He cried.
Yeah.
And I think if you haven't had that kind of holy moment where your heart's been broken for a place, then you'll figure out reasons to leave when it gets tough. But if you're called, if you've been divinely called to a location, then you'll find the courage to keep going when things get tough. And I'm grateful that I had that Friday morning with the book of Nehemiah, and it saved me so many times. And I know, there'll be a day. Listen, we're all interim pastors. The church doesn't belong to me.
Good.
There'll be a day where I'll hand the baton over to the next guy, and Pam and I will do something else for the Lord. But until that time comes, I'm going to stay true to my calling until He calls me to something else. And I think for a lot of young leaders, you need to have that moment before you say yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. And one of the things when you think about the turmoil that you came into, the turmoil that was added on your 100th day of being the lead pastor with that shooting, if you're listening and you're thinking, well, boy, he has no idea what I've been through in my church. Well, replay that segment several times because there's always somebody who has it worse.
Yeah.
I talked to some of your staff. I did a little work. Your staff is incredibly loyal to you, and they deeply love you, what that tells me is that you've done a great job of really changing that culture and creating that culture. But one of your staff said, Brady doesn't hide his humanity because if he does, then he knows that we will too. How did you create that culture at New Life?
Well, I appreciate whoever said that gets a raise tomorrow because that was very nice of them. But
I'll give you the name later.
I'll give you my name later. Yeah, I think there's what I say to my staff is I have some very simple goals at the end of my life. I want to get to the end of this and be a full human being. A lot of pastors lose their humanity by trying to portray something that's not real. So I want to get to the end of my life, and I want to laugh at a good joke when it's funny. I want to cry at a good movie when I need to. I want to be able to laugh and cry. I want to be a good friend, a good brother. I want Pam to love me still. I mean, we've been married 35 years, but I want her to really love me and respect me. I want my kids to respect me. And you can't do that if you lose your humanity along the way. And just being honest with our staff, letting them in on pain and hurt and joy, not running from the spotlight when you can. I think a lot of pastors crave that stage. They crave the attention more than they should. And over the years, I've just said, look, guys, if somebody else can do this better than me, or if someone else has something better to say, I'm going to let you say it. I just don't need to be up there all the time and be the center of attention all the time. And I think we got to wrestle that to the ground. And you'll look up one day and you'll have a bunch of really good people around you. If you'll run from the spotlight, if you'll share the responsibility, if you'll laugh a lot, eat good food, and go home. That creates a good staff culture right there.
Yeah, well, you have done that. I went a step further with your staff, and I asked them to share some of the strengths of Brady. And they said a commitment to keep the main thing. A phrase that I think you've said, we fight for the health of a person. The staff trusts him with their future. There's a safety net and openness to talk with him. And growth is not a distraction. So I hope that fills your cup today.
So
just to know that those are the things that people are saying. And I've watched the culture change there. And the health is so important. One pastor used to say, it's really not so much about church growth as much as it is about church health.
Yes.
And if you're working at the health, which you are, the growth takes place. And the church where I served at Southeast, I think in the 62-year history of it, there was exponential growth in 4 years of the 62 years. But all the other years,
steady as she goes.
Just steady growth. And if you do that for a long time, then you can reach a lot of people with the gospel.
Yeah, growth has never been the goal.
Yeah,
health is the goal. I mean, I love that. Just last week I sat with one of our young leaders. This is something I feel prompted to say because I'm finding this to be not normal, and it should be normal. This young guy, very talented. Every pastor in the world would want this guy on your staff. He's talented. He's smart. He works hard. He's a great attitude. But he came to me and said, Pastor Brady, when I came here, you told me that I could talk to you about transition if it started stirring in me. I said, absolutely. And I said, in fact, I want you to come to me before, if you're wanting to have a child, and that's by saying that, I mean by going to another church, taking a senior pastor role. I said, come to me before you get pregnant. Don't come to me 8 months pregnant. He said, well, Pastor Brady, I think my wife and I are called to be senior pastors. And I agree with him. He is called. He's got that kind of gifting. But for a lot of pastors, that would have been a bad day. I got a really talented young staff person that I'm about to lose. But I don't see it as a loss. I see it as a wedding. I see it as ascending. And here's what I'll say to pastors, and please take this to heart. Every time, 100% of the time with no exceptions, Pastor, every time I have sent out a leader, I get leaders.
Yeah.
And what happens is young leaders are paying attention to this. They'll say, well, if New Life Church is like Hotel California, where I can check in but I can never check out, I'm not going there. Mm-hmm. For all the over 40 crowd, that song.
We do.
But Hotel California. But you can check in, but you can never check out.
Yeah.
Like I say to pastors, if you want a dozen really good young leaders around you, then be willing to send out a dozen. Put your hands on them, pray over them. Let their leaving be a wedding, not a divorce. And then other young leaders around the country will say, look what he did. Look what Pastor Brady did. He took that young guy in, he raised him up, he put his hands on him and sent him out with a blessing. I want to go there too.
It's the principle of sowing and reaping.
Exactly.
It's no different than financial giving. It's actually giving to the kingdom. And, it's probably a great wrap up for us today, because as you're sharing that, I'm thinking, well, of course God's going to bless that, because you're not building Brady's empire. You're not building Brady's kingdom.
Right.
You're building his kingdom. And so when you have that type of an attitude and you see great potential in a person being able to utilize their giftedness more fully, perhaps in another setting, you're not going to be mad at that person, or you're not going to put them on a guilt trip, or, well, you know what, you're not going to be much good around here for the next month. Why don't, we'll give you a month's pay and you guys start looking. That's not the attitude. Instead, the attitude is, okay, how can we come alongside of you? How can we help be the wind beneath your wings? How can we make certain that God uses you to the fullest? I loved that conversation, because it was so rich and full of so many different takeaways. I wrote down as many as I possibly could. I really appreciate the fact that Brady wasn't legalistic about some of the areas that he talked about, that he said, there are exceptions like Easter and Christmas, but this is what the norm is going to be. I thought that was great. I need to hear stuff like that. I don't like the always or never. He said you can't lead a church without trust. What a reminder, the church had to heal before they could move forward. And what he said was, and this really struck me being a visionary person, he said, I had to put my goals and my vision for the church on hold for the next 5 years until they could heal. And he just had to pastor and love on the flock while they were wounded. And you might find yourself in a season like that with your church. Maybe it's going to be 3 months or 1 year of healing, but that's something that we need to keep in mind. And then I love the FOMO and the JOMO, fear of missing out to the joy of missing out. Just what happens when you don't have something planned and having margin in your life. I thought that was great. The powerful story of his wife having her bags packed and then him coming home and saying, I choose Pam, and being willing to resign and to leave everything for the sake of his wife. That got to me. It got to me on several different levels, partly because of my struggles with workaholic tendencies. There was a time in my ministry when I was in my late 20s when I had 2 daughters at the time, and I was actually caught up in saying yes to everything, just like Brady said. I would take outside speaking engagements. I would work 65 hours a week at church in addition to these extra speaking things. And I would rationalize and say, well, I'm doing it for my family, when really I think I was just doing it for my own ego, and I was doing it for myself. And I didn't realize the toll that it was taking on my girls and on my wife. But it all came to a head on a Father's Day when I was preaching that Sunday. And it came time for me to preach. And just beforehand, there was a soloist came up and sang a song. And the song was entitled Slow Down, Daddy. And she sang this chorus 4 different times. And it left such a mark on me. I can still remember every word of the chorus. Slow down, Daddy, don't work so hard. We're proud of our house. We've got a big enough yard. Slow down, Daddy, we want you around. Daddy, please slow down. And I walked up to preach while everyone was clapping for the song. And when I got up and I opened my mouth, no words came out. There was nothing. And there were crocodile tears just streaming down my face. And I looked over and our worship leader, Greg, and he grabbed a microphone. He came out and said, let me lead y'all in a chorus. And he gave me some time to get my composure. At the time, I didn't realize it, but our children's ministry director was in that congregation in that hour. And I later found out that her young son looked up at her when I was getting emotional and said, Mommy, why is Pastor Dave crying? And she very candidly said, well, when the Holy Spirit convicts you of sin, sometimes you cry. She's no longer on our staff. But she was right. And when the Holy Spirit convicts you of sin, sometimes you cry. And I can honestly say to you that on that day, in that moment, I drew a line in the sand, and I willingly and repentantly chose to place my wife and my kids where they belonged, which was below God, but above work. And it was a powerful epiphany for me. And maybe as Brady talked and Brady shared, you felt some of the same things. And maybe you need to go to your spouse, or maybe you need to go to your kids and say, I choose you. And say their name. Say all of their names. And mean it. And then back it up with the life and the schedule that you have in the weeks to come. Well, a huge part of what we hope to accomplish with this podcast is to equip you both personally and professionally. And one way we do that is through the focuspastor.org. And when you create a free Focus Pastor account, you gain exclusive access to free resources. Plus, we give you 50% off of everything in the Focus Pastor store. So sign up, head over to thefocuspastor.org, or click the link below in the show notes. Well, again, thanks so much for joining us on this journey. Every Tuesday, remember, we drop a brand new conversation on Pastor to Pastor. It's designed to encourage, inspire, and challenge you. And if you found this episode helpful, please just pass it on. Share it with your friends. You can find us anywhere that you listen to podcasts, on YouTube, at the Focus Pastor channel, because leadership can be lonely, but rest assured, you're not alone. Until next time, I'm Dave Stone. God bless you.